All right, good afternoon, and welcome to the Heritage Foundation. We appreciate your showing up on a hot summer day. I'd ask if all of you could make sure your phones or any other electronic gadgets are on mute or off so we don't disturb either our presentation or our panels. When I was working on Korea at the CIA, we would read intelligence reports during the 1990s about the brutal human rights conditions within North Korea, both within the gulags as well as for the general populace. And then years later, as information became more readily available to the general public through reports by NGOs, through books by North Koreans who had fled the brutality of North Korea, and then through really the groundbreaking work by the UN Commission of Inquiry last year, and the report was published last year. So whenever any of these reports or books came out, people were quite rightfully shocked and really disgusted when they first heard of what North Korean, the regime, had done to its people. And that information really is all the more striking and all the more poignant when one hears it directly from someone who has endured it for themselves. And I found that that shock, that disgust, doesn't become any weaker when one hears the stories over and over. And indeed, I think the shock is really replaced with outrage, that the conditions continue and continue and continue within North Korea. And I just finished reading the book, The Girl with Seven Names, this past weekend. And oftentimes people describe a book as, oh, I couldn't put it down. I found actually with this book, I had to put it down, because it was so stressful, and that the situations that were described in it were really just too nerve-wracking, and then I just had to take a pause from it. And then I realized I'm just reading it, and I couldn't even imagine the stress and the nerves that would be in it, actually experiencing those occurrences, either myself or having my family go through it. So today's event may make you uncomfortable. It may leave you shocked and indeed outraged, but hopefully it will also leave you with a sense of responsibility. Because as Michael Kirby, the chairman of the UN Commission of Inquiry, I thought so eloquently commented, now is the time for action. We can't say we don't know anymore. The suffering and tears of the people of North Korea demand action. Our generation must tackle this issue urgently and collectively, and indeed the world will judge us by our response. Now, our speaker, Hyeon-seo, has been described as a North Korean defector. And I've never really liked the term defector, because it seems to have a negative connotation, and indeed defection is defined as abandoning a person, a cause, or a doctrine to which one is bound by some tie as of allegiance or duty. But really, how can one abandon a country when that country has already abandoned them? Perhaps a better phrase would be North Korean freedom seeker. So today we are honored to have a North Korean freedom seeker to tell us her story. So please join me in welcoming Hyeon-seo to tell us her story.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for coming. It's an honor to be here. And I come from a country where human rights, freedom don't exist. And the North Korean regime is the worst human rights violator in the world. Because as a North Korean, from the moment I was born, I was fed propaganda, and I viewed the Kim family that not as our fearless, not only as our fearless protectors, but also there as gods. Because without free flow of information, the North Korean people completely believed that they're not human beings. Because I even believed ridiculous things like the leaders don't go to the bathroom like humans. And I believed the leaders even killed the enemies when they're 5 to 6 years old. So North Koreans are constantly inundated with anti-imperialist propaganda, especially against Americans. From the kindergarten, we learned many bad things about America, because we learned many horrible stories. For example, that Americans killed many North Korean citizens and tortured North Koreans during the Korean War, and that's why we learned that South Koreans are even suffering under the Americans imperialists today, because we learned that Americans are executing South Korean students even today. So I was very proud of being born in North Korea. At least the Kim regime, the leaders are protecting our country. And that's why we have today the rallies where people chant anti-American slogans and children attack cardboard American soldiers, and young children are singing hateful songs against Americans. But even people who didn't believe the regime, they couldn't say openly their beliefs, because the system had completely destroyed the trust between people, because we have many spies watching everyone. Between wife and husband can be spy on each other, and then after divorced, and then even the neighbors can be spy each other. So I still remember that my mom told me many times, even when I was young, be careful what you are saying in the outside. Don't repeat what you hear at home. And the words have ears and the fears have eyes. So whenever she says that, I tend to look at to the world, and I believed that people even can hear through the words. In North Korea, if you made a mistake by saying wrong things, the entire family would be disappeared in the middle of the night and then sent to political prison camp. But I didn't know why they were always taken during 3 a.m. in the morning while everybody's sleeping. And then actually I found the answer after I came to South Korea, because the North Korean regime, when they're moving to the prison camp, actually there's no reason to taking. So maybe it's not good for the people who's watching that at the time. So they're taking them when people are sleeping at night. So actually, one of my friend's fathers said simply, they were living in Pyongyang at the time, and then he said that this system is unfair. And then he's told to his best friend while drinking, and then he was sent to a political prison camp while his family was forcibly relocated to a desolate mountainous areas where it is extremely difficult to survive. Because as a North Korean, we know there is a prison camp, but we were so scared of being sent there, because especially we don't know what's happening inside. And one thing we knew is if somebody sent inside couldn't come back out even after they died. So actually I described in my book, one of my long distant relatives personally experienced this horrible fate. He came to North Korea during 1970s from China, who thought North Korea was going to be a communist utopia, but later he found that propaganda was not true, so he decided to cross back into China again during 1980s, but unfortunately he was caught by the border guards and he was sent to the political prison camp. So he was sentenced to 30 years at the time, and then his son was only a baby, and after he grew up, he visited the prison camp several times to see his father, but he was every time denied to access. And actually, it's surprisingly, in 30 years later, while I was living in China, that my mom called me, he was released from prison. And that means he survived in prison for 30 years. So I thought maybe, then he finally can unite it with their family, but no. After he released the prison, if this is a prison, there's another circle out of the prison, there's another village. He's supposed to live in the village right next to prison. He's not allowed to leave the village entire his life. So after he released from the prison. 1 year later, in that village, he's died. So his son even couldn't retrieve his body for a proper burial. As a North Korean, we grew up with constantly with the public executions. And I witnessed my first public execution when I was 7 years old. I was shocked by seeing a man was hanging by his neck from under the railroad bridge. And I was very young at the time, so I don't know what was considered a crime. But in North Korea, the criminals, the people who's imprisoned or executed for many absurd reasons, they were killed. For example, a person who killed a cow, or fortune tellers, defectors, smugglers, and alleged South Korean spies. When we see the public executions, people were we were very shocked by seeing that, but we accept that public execution as part of our life automatically, since we didn't know anything about the concept of human rights. So the constant public executions were a constant reminder to me that I shouldn't do anything to disobey the leadership, the government. Otherwise, I will be killed, exactly the victim in front of me. So that was the main propaganda tool in North Korea. But since I lived right next border with China, I think I was lucky to living there. That's why living in North Korea, we were such a cut off from the outside world. But by living in there, China was the only country I could compare with my own. And luckily, we have TV at the time, and all TV could pick up a few Chinese TV channels. And I watched the TV secretly, and I became overwhelmed with curiosity, because every day in North Korea we only have one TV channels, KCNA, and then what I saw the most was their little pictures and their names and the strong propaganda words and anti-slogans. All those things are what I learned, what I saw from the TV. But in Chinese TV, it's fascinating to me. I mean, the people even dye hair and then have rings and necklaces, just jeans. It's so different compared to what I learned, because I learned that actually North Korea was superior to China. But I have perfect reason to doubt that propaganda, because I was living right next to the border. And then we were suffered from power shortages every night, and we lived in a black hole. But while we were suffering the power shortages, I mean, my city was the capital of my province, but across the border, China, it was a small village, I guess. But even we were living in capital, but we were suffering that. But the Chinese villages even looks better than us. They even have lights and street lights. So, but in North Korea, watching Chinese TV, it's illegal, because of the government. People always patrolling. Even the North Korean agents are not only the border guards. The agents are watching the house civil. If there's light at night, they're just without asking. They just attack house. So every night, whenever we have lights, I just kept in my room, and then I blocked the window with a curtain and with extra thick blankets to prevent lights. So I saw the TV. And then in North Korea, we don't have commercials at the time. Even today, I don't know if they have, but it's fascinating to me that from TV I can see the products can be publicly advertised. So those things it's changed in my mind. So I wanted to find out the answer. And when I stared at the border, I saw simultaneously two different worlds. While one I witnessed the darkness of my homeland, the other I saw the bright new world, the vibrant colors of the other side of in China. So the curiosity and attraction of the bigger world, in the end, it made me to cross the border into China. But at the time, I was a very young, naive girl. I could have never imagined that I would be separated from my family for so long, nor could I have realized that I would be avoid the bright new world and live in the shadows. So I was hunted by the Chinese authorities because simply I was a North Korean defector. And even I was caught by the Chinese police, and I was narrowly avoided being repatriated to North Korea by convincing them that I was actually a Chinese citizen. So due to all the dangers surrounding me, that I had to change my name constantly to protect my identity. So I became the girl with 7 names, which is the title of my memoir. I had to overcome so many obstacles during the journey. So my life was like a roller coaster, but I was able to deal with the stress and the difficult periods. But one thing that I could have never handled was being separated from my family. When I was in North Korea, I was so young to realize that, I never gave my parents birthday gifts. But although I received gifts from them many times, but I never thanked them. Instead of thanked them, I thanked to the dear littles. I was holding the gifts, and then I bought to their pictures to giving me such nice gifts. So when I was living in China, I realized that it was wrong, and then it was too late at the time when I realized it, and then so I felt so guilty. So it made me very guilty, and then so over the time since then, I hate my birthdays. So I never celebrate my birthday and holidays. So the times was so painful to me that I still can't celebrate my birthday myself. It's just so awkward to me to do that. Nobody should ever have to be separated from their family members. Many people around the world might take their time with family members for granted, but as a defector, we are painfully aware of how precious the time is being together. So many defectors are separated from their family members forever, and so I hope by sharing my story and the dream of my peaceful unification, I hope I have inspired some of you to involve to helping North Korean people and North Korean defectors. And this is a very ongoing tragedy that we must end. Thank you for listening.
Okay, we'll take some questions from the audience, and I'm going to exercise a prerogative and ask the first one. In reading the book, I was surprised that you were able to communicate via cell phone with your mother and your brother.
Yeah.
Is that just because they were so close to the border with China and that they had access to cell phones? Or could you have been able to communicate with North Koreans sort of deeper into North Korea via cell phone?
The first one,
Right.
because since we lived right next to the border, as I saw the Chinese TV from the Chinese TV signal, so during the 2000 early at the time, it was very early. Right now, there's many defectors near the border. They're using Chinese cell phones, so about the news from North Korea right now, it's all from the Chinese cell phones. Those routes. We have many news right now, but when I was starting to communicate with my family, it was very early 2000, and then actually my brother at the time told me, actually it's possible to use a cell phone in North Korea, so we just tried. So I sent into North Korea, and I was thinking, what kind of cell phone I can send into North Korea? I was thinking at the time in China, Nokia was looks ugly but strong. I feel maybe more. Yeah, that's why I sent. I found that has better signals, so it worked very well. So with that phone, almost nearly 10 years we had over the time we had phone calls. So every time, so I felt guilty that I didn't do anything good thing for my mom. That's why from when I was living in China, she called me many times from North Korea. So I was on the phone hours, because I wanted to be friend with her, because since I can't be next to her, so at least I can do my best over the phone. And then the phone bills was so expensive, more than my salary sometimes. But I just did. I thought as daughter, I have to do it. Yeah. That's why I could hear many news from North Korea directly.
All right, if you have a question, please raise your hand, and we'll have microphones over here on the left.
Hi, my question is, why do you think most of the defectors are women? Is it because of access to money, or is there a political reason? Why do you think that is?
Oh yeah, between 70-80% are female right now, because in North Korea, man is mandatory to work in state-run factories or companies, and women stay at home because the Kim Jong-il said the wife should have better duties, stay at home to support their husband, their kids. So that's why just the women stay at home. But during the famine, I mean, man, it's mandatory have to go to work still, even though the company was just closed. But if you don't go to work, it doesn't mean you was sent to be to political prison camp, but labor camps. So that's why why a man working in the company, and then they're suffering from food. That's why women started to work in the black market to support their family members. That's why actually these days women's power is increasing in North Korea because of the black market situations. And then also the another thing is that's why women has more free to leave the country than men. And then in China also, there's many brokers waiting near the border. And then in North Korea, there's people knew about that. If man crossing the border is relatively difficult than women to survive in China. And then because in China, there's many men women, North Korean de facto, this is a problem right now. Many women sold as sex slaves or bribes to a Chinese man, where the gender imbalance has driven up the demand for women. That's why many women cross the border. That's the reason.
In front, John? Nope, all right, we'll start with Olivia and then over here to Josh.
Hi, Olivia Enos, the Heritage Foundation. I have a two-part question. One, what are the biggest challenges facing defectors when they get to South Korea? And two, of those challenges, what do you think are the most important things the South Korean government or other external governments can do to promote assimilation of North Korean defectors into society?
Actually, when like my mom's situation, when she arrived in South Korea, she arrived 2010. That she thought the Korean, the way speaking in Korea is a foreign language. She didn't consider that that's Korean. So over the 70 years, it's completely, changed a lot. Not only cultures, but the lifestyles. On the outside, we look similar, but inside, we become so different. So when we come to South Korea, actually, which I was thinking, I thought South Koreans are welcoming us because we've been separated so long. So I thought they're long for us. Because in North Korea, we were singing, when we growing up, every day we singing for South Koreans because we thought South Koreans are poor, they are starving. That's why we have a sympathy for them. That's why we even from the kindergarten, we sang songs. But that's why I had a similar feeling. Maybe South Koreans also have a similar, thought like us. But when I arrived there, we became completely alien. It was outside. Sometimes I thought we were foreigner than any foreigners in South Korea. There's many foreigners in South Korea, but we were more foreigner than them. And then the most difficulty was because of the education gap between North and South. And then North Korean defectors, they didn't learn many job skills or important things from North Korea. But when they arrived in South Korea, it's hard to compete with their counterfeits from South Korea. that's why the most difficult is that, and then I think prejudice. So we don't want to be treated as a alien, in South Korea. So actually, many defectors say something. It's better when they're living in China. They accept it. They are not, Chinese is not all countries. If they treat us like alien or like outside, it's okay. We are outside. But living in South Korea, we share same blood in this planet. We share kimchi, doenjang, and there's only language we can share together. So it's for them very difficult to suffer from that. But it's changed. But when I went to South Korea 2008, also it was very serious until then. But these days, it's people. South Koreans are more changing in positive ways because there's a North Korean defector females talk show talk about the reality inside North Korea. So South Koreans are crying with us because I think many of them thought the horrible North Korean regime and we are all together. But through our heartbreaking stories, they realized actually we are the victim of the regime. So it's changing, and then also many people also want to support, the North Korean students secretly, not openly, but to culturing the future leaders. So it's really changing in positive ways. Like back then in 2008, whenever I took taxi, and then taxi driver asked me, "Oh, where are you from?" The pronunciation seems different. So I said, "I'm from North Korea," and then the driver just silent. He didn't say any words. It's so awkward to me. But right now, if I say something in that situation, the driver just so passionate. He was talking about many, I saw the talk shows and then the tragedy. And so, I was very happy for real change in positive ways. Yeah.
Thank you. My question is about the internal information blockade in North Korea, not just what separates you from the rest of the world, but what separates you from other places in North Korea. So if a person lives in Onsong, how do you learn the news in Siniju or Wonsan or Hamhung or even Pyongyang? How do you get information about things in other parts of North Korea or connect or communicate with those people?
No, impossible. We don't have it. So, because in North Korea, the broadcast from TV is only from Pyongyang, and then because since we have a travel restrictions between not only province, between cities, so if you don't get the travel permission certificates, it's hard to travel. So we don't have a cell phone system. We don't have internet. So it's very hard to communicate. We don't know what's happening the other province together. So it's a surprise. I didn't know there's a Hamgyong North province or other cities that had the famine earlier than my city. So actually in South Korea, I asked many defectors. I said, when do you think North Korean famine started? And then it's all different. Their answer is from Hamgyong North province. Those people even told me it's even before Kim Il-sung died, 1994, it started. But if I ask people from my province, Haesan, if I ask them, they started from 1997. Yeah, that was the year I defected. I saw the famine from that time. So wow, I even surprised the famine started before 1994. So which means we don't have a contact. We don't know anything what's happening in the other provinces. So actually, as I said on my TED Talk, then when my mom brought home a letter from a coworker's sister, at that time, until that moment, when I read that the letter was sent from Hamgyong North province by letter. So I don't know, to come to my province, how long it's gonna take. Maybe for, I don't know, more than 10 days, I guess, because the situation is horrible in North Korea. So I read the letter, and then just the whole 5 family members were dying for starvation, because they were lying on the floor together. And then from the letter, actually, I learned that before people dying for starvation, I was imagined a very thin, mean face, but I've learned from the letter is becoming swollen right before they die. So when I read the letters, it's completely changed my mind. Which, yeah, if not the letter, maybe I didn't really realize that situation earlier than other people in North Korea.
Hyun-soo, congratulations on your book, and it's great that you're being the voice for the voiceless North Koreans right now, and you're speaking through the book. So it's a great thing that you're doing. My question to you is: the North Korean regime is known to attack defectors who are very vocal and active in terms of speaking out about the human rights situation. Just last week, they released a statement through 우리 민족끼리 attacking Kang Chul-hwan and Chung Kwang-il, who are Yodok survivors. And so far, I haven't seen any attacks from the regime. We haven't seen any attacks from the regime against you. But when or if that happens, how do you see yourself, preparing for that, and just how you would deal with that sort of attack from the regime, knowing they are so upset about defectors that, in their opinion, are defaming the dignity of the dear leader and all that stuff. So, just question regarding that. Thank you.
I'm human also. I'm scared, I'm scared about, because as you said, and then in the history, the North Korean regime had attacked and then even assassinated defectors. So actually I'm scared about that, but I can't be silent while the regime commits horrible human rights abuses. So I decide to, speaking out, and then I'm living right now with my decision, and I will keep going. But my first priority is I want to protect my relatives inside North Korea more than me. I mean, they are more in danger, and then by publishing books, I'm more scared about that for their security. But in Seoul, actually, you mentioned the reports 2 months ago or 1 month ago from the United Nations event after that. Actually, I saw before the NBC released the news 2 weeks ago, I got that from my personal source. And then actually, I told some of them who was involved at the event, I told them to be careful because the North Korean regime is aimed to be assassinate 24 North Korean defectors. But I mean, I wonder how can they assassinate 24 defectors? It will raise a lot of international issues, right? But still, it means I have to be careful. And then certainly they know who I am, but I don't know if they're gonna make videos about me in the future. I hope they don't. But that's why even right now, for me, it's even defector friends I can't meet freely because there's a 2013, there's a huge issue in South Korea. One of the defector was imprisoned for a spy, but he was my best friend. And then I didn't know until that time, we were planning about the future. He was a very prominent defector. It's really smart, and I thought he will be one of the defector community leader in the future. So we worked together, and then suddenly he was appeared as a spy. I don't know which one is true, but so I'm so scared of that. So even from that experience, I even can't trust the people around me, even defectors who. So actually, recently, I moved to my house into different areas so that my original address, some of them the defectors already knew about that. So I just to protect myself. That's my best way to do that. But I don't know. I just only my hope is wish for there's nothing happen bad things to me. Like just only pray for me for the safe. Nothing to the, but I can't keep in home, do nothing, that's impossible.
Well, okay, we'll go, right there, gentleman in the white shirt, and then the woman here in front.
Thank you. I was just wondering if there's a difference in how Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung are perceived and thought about in North Korea. If you could talk about that.
Sorry, could you explain one more again?
if there's a difference between how North Korean people think about Kim Il Sung and Kim Jong Il, or how they're presented.
Not Kim Jong Un, right? Yeah,
Right.
Kim Il Sung and Kim Jong Il. Yeah, actually, depends on generation. Like my parents' generation, they received a lot of benefits from the regime, so they tend to respect Kim Il Sung more than Kim Jong Il. That's why when Kim Il Sung died, North Korean people were crying seriously. I mean, I can't say 100%, but most of them cried with their heart, because they believed that Kim Il Sung brought good life for them. Because even my mom told me many times that I don't know, 1970s or something, there's on the streets, we have a markets that run by the government. So much candies or fishes were there. Nobody was taking. It's provided by the government freely. So much food was there, and then just throwing out to the garbage because it's rotten. To not anybody taking. So when I heard that, it's like a dream place. So I never saw that. I was born 1980, and I never experienced that. So we don't see the big differences. But right now, during the big famine, and people believed because of Kim Il Sung died, we have a big famine. And then during the Kim Jong Un, Kim Jong Il period, because of him, they we know we were suffering only because of American sanctions. That was the main propaganda tool. But also it's blame for Kim Jong Il a little bit. So their loyalty is getting less. And then after 2000, after the famine, people focusing on money more than in the past. So the loyalty is just losing. So it's a very surprising thing. In the past, when I was living in North Korea, even between wife and husband, they can't share information together. There's some cases after they divorced, one person really told to the government about the other person's behavior and then was sent to prison. So only we believe, only parents and siblings can trust each other. But actually, my mom told me that in my hometown, there's a very high-ranking officer. It's a very high-ranked officer. They were very best friends. And then she went their home during the lunchtime. She escaped the North Korea before 2009. So she said it's 2007, around that time. And at that time, when they visited their house, on the TV, Kim Jong-il appeared. And then the official, he just turned off the TV with the remote quickly, and then he said it's bullshit. He said in Korean, it's bullshit. And then he said, do you know he's exactly same my age? And then do you know he's old, is faking, is bullshitting? So when I heard it, I said, is that really true? I was very happy. But I hard to believe if that is true. And then my brother said, yeah, I was at that time together. But right now it's changed through that time. I mean, by sharing secret, they're building trust together. Not like in the past, still it's people reporting to the government. Because my aunt, my relatives, last year, they trying to escape the country, so I managed to them escape. But even before cross the border, her friend reported to the government. They are planning to escape to South Korea, so they were sent to prison last August. It is happened. So on the other hand, while people is complaining about the regime openly when there's somebody believing between each other, but still there's many people exactly the same like in the past.
Okay, we had a question down here in the front.
Hi, thank you for coming. I'm an intern at East West Center. I wanted to ask about, there was a South Korean man that started a university for Korean Chinese in Yeonbyeon in 1988. And then in 2010, he opened a university, Pyongyang University of Science and Technology, to help North Korea and maybe the North Koreans to teach the students to build infrastructure. Do you know about the university? Do you think it helps North Korea?
You mean 평양 과기대, right?
평양 기술대.
Or 연변 과기대. 과기대, I guess.
Yeah, I think so.
Actually, I disagreed with that. I mean, I don't know about that much actually, but that's another propaganda tool for me, because I mean that's controlled by the regime. They're not functioning well in their way. What I don't know what he planned, but it's not functioning in their way. And then, as Suki Kim said from her book and speech, it's showing that it wasn't right by having that. I mean, those even the students in there, they have no freedom. And then many people, they have no access to approach those schools. So I don't know, it's not really helpful for this situation. That's my answer.
Why don't we come over on this side, right here, and then the woman in the white jacket.
Hi, thank you for coming. My question is how do people inside North Korea view China? I mean, sometimes the relationship between China and North Korea is good, sometimes it's not that good. So I don't know whether it will change over time. Thank you.
Actually, on the surface, it looks North Korea and China's relationship is good. But what I learned from North Korea from when I was young, even before Kim Il-sung died, he said we shouldn't trust China. It was very strong for us. So even though we have a blood tie relations between China, but living in North Korea, we didn't really trust them. And then actually certain periods who has the relatives in China or the officials who has relatives from China, actually they had some problems. So it depends on Kim Jong-il's mood. Sometimes they're releasing them, sometimes, the North Korean relatives, they can't visit Chinese relatives, depends on. But it's the famine changed a lot. During the famine, especially I was living near the border, there's many Chinese companies, they invested in North Korea. And then in North Korea, any product, even salt, even everything is from China. Because in North Korea, we don't have any products made by the North Korean government. So it's all from China. So without Chinese products, actually, I can't imagine. Without Chinese products, maybe North Korea can exist, seriously. So especially during the famine, and people thought Chinese are savior. Although I heard actually many North Koreans from before the famine, we complained to China a lot of time, because since I was living near the border, we have a friendship bridge, which is only learned by legally. Does government work or legal business. And then every day from China, huge trucks, just a lot of huge trucks coming to North Korea. And then at the end of the day, on the trucks, they had, many different goods, including just trees, many things. So when North Koreans, we see that, I remember even my mom even said one time, those are bastards, they're taking all resources every time out of North Korea. They are taking slowly every day, and then in the end, they're going to take everything. That was actually what North Korean people thought at the time. But through the famine, they became savior. So actually, in the past, we were talking about unification all the time. We wanted to have unification with South Korea. That was our primary things. But over the famine, while some people want to have unification from South Korea, but people's minds is changing. They think it's okay if we make unification, not unification, but belong to China, whatever makes them is a better life. So actually it's a shocking that people's mind changing. Yeah.
Okay, we had right there in the white shirt or white jacket.
Is there some government incentive to betray your neighbors and your friends and your family to the government?
For example?
So you said that your aunt and her family were betrayed by a neighbor when they were planning to escape North Korea. Why would you do that? That doesn't
Actually,
make
it's
sense.
very sensitive that I even couldn't put this story in my book. It's my relative's security, so I don't really want to mention about these details. But it's shocking. It was her friend, my aunt's friend, and then because in North Korea right now, if you report to the government about somebody's trying to escape, they have there's a rewarding. They are paying money. I don't know how much money exactly they are paying, but they have this kind of system right now. That's why I think they are aiming for the money, and then they just did that. So not only my aunt, but I can't remember how many, but not only one person. It was a few people was imprisoned at the time. Yeah, but luckily, I thought they would be sent to prison camp, political prison. Everybody said although they didn't caught on site by crossing the border, but they planned to go to South Korea because they have cell phones, Chinese cell phones when they're caught. So they have all the evidence. We've been having calling from me, the numbers. So at the time, actually, I changed my number. I was scared, so I changed my South Korean cell phone number when my aunt was caught. And then, but I don't know. But later, I did my best to find brokers. Brokers are asking huge money to release them from the prison. It's insane, the money. But I was thinking maybe I need, ask for people, do my best, as long as if make them survive, make them not sent to the political prison camp. And then later, in few months later, 5 months later, it worked out, and then they were tortured severely, and then they are released. And then actually, last week when I was in London, my mom texted me that my aunt approached. It was the first time after released from prison. So actually, I'm living in other world. I mean, even my book is horrible. The stories. I mean, when I bring in my family to guide them in freedom, but still, it didn't finish. It's for me. I have a responsibility. If somebody wants to escape the country to, for freedom, then I have to do my best. So I don't know what is waiting for me tomorrow. So when my mom told me last week my aunt's contact from North Korea, I'm happy that she's survived. But at the same time, I'm just I don't know. I'm worried about what can I do for more. I mean, what is waiting for me? What obstacles?
Right here in the center.
Thank you for being here. I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on whether pressuring China to treat North Koreans better, North Koreans who are in China, either living or trying to escape to a third country, Mongolia or Laos or somewhere. Do you think that would have any benefit for North Korean refugees, or do you think that there's just not a chance that things are going to improve in China for North Koreans?
Seems impossible right now because the situation is very horrible than we know right now in reality. So actually, that's why I don't know what can I do for that. It's very hard to change the Chinese government's mind. And then I was thinking actually these days, actually I planned from a little few months ago, I want to give a speech in China, in the land, in Chinese land with the Chinese, to deliver my, just as a North Korean defector, I experienced all the horrible things. So with their voice, I'm with all North Korean defectors' voice, I want to very sincerely ask the Chinese government or deliver a message to the ordinary Chinese people. So I was looking for the stage, but actually I found it's difficult to find the stage in Western countries. So only the way is in China, but I didn't hear the answer from Shanghai yet. So maybe they will prevent me before even go to China, because I heard my book right now is banned in China. So Chinese people have no way to access this book. And then, otherwise I was thinking, because I want to change. I don't know, I know even though if after I gave a speech, it won't change, but at least I want to ask one thing to them, there's many defectors when they cross the border and when they come to South Korea. China is a mandatory land to cross. There's no way to come to South Korea besides. So, please don't quote them. Just let them freely go either Thailand or Mongolia or Laos. They don't want to stay in China. They want to come to South Korea seek for asylum. So at least you guys can do it, isn't it? They're not living in China. That's why at least I don't ask for them to give ID cards, citizenship to those wives in China. It's too much for them maybe, but at least don't quote trying to catch them, because I experienced that 2009. It's killing me every single minute. So we don't want to stay in there. We want to take the bus and we want to go the other directions. But many defectors are caught in China and then repatriated. That's the main problem.
Susan, right
here. You speak excellent English, and I take from your journey in China, where you impersonated the Chinese, pretended you were a Chinese person. You must speak some Chinese as well?
Yes, it's my second language.
So do many North Koreans learn Chinese, or how did you manage to do this so well? Because I think you've done a really great job with language. And how many other people who try to escape North Korea can maybe have some knowledge of the Chinese language to help their escape?
Zero. In North Korea, first of all, my experience, we are learning foreign languages like English and Russian at the time, but we don't focus on that much. We don't know the values of learning the foreign language. We don't know where to use that. And then we have a Chinese character. It's Mandarin character, which uses right now in Taiwan, Hong Kong, not in China right now, but it's old style letter we learned. But my father, he's died right now, but he encouraged me to do to study foreign languages a lot. So at the time, I didn't know why. He saw the future earlier than anybody, I guess. And then I didn't see the values. Like my brother, he's sick of learning English in school at the time. Although we are learning very basic things in school as a student. And then actually he asked one time to his teacher. In North Korea, it's not allowed to have questioning to teacher during the class. What teacher says we just everything we have to agree. And then, but minor things we can do it. And then my brother asked to teacher, why we have to learn the enemy's language? And then, actually, I was wondered what she gonna answer for that. But I think she's pretty smart. She said, no, you are not learning American bastard language, but we are learning British language. Yeah. So at the time, I didn't know what's different between American language and British language, because for us, all Westerners look same, all look like Americans. So, but yeah, the accent is different. Later, I found out like that. But in North Korea, we are more focusing about Kim regime's history and their activism. That's the mandatory classes we have to take every day. So, but at the time when I was learning the Chinese character in school, it was fascinating. It was beautiful to me. Although it's very difficult it's kind of painting to me, but I did my best. So in my school, I was always top number 1 or top 2, the test score. And then I didn't know it will be help in my life later. So when I crossed the border into China, I saw Chinese TV, as I said. And I sometimes understand Chinese TV always have subtitles because China is huge, and then the population, many people, they don't know how to read. That's why they put the subtitles. I didn't know from beginning why they put the subtitles, and that helped me a lot learning Chinese. And then before escape North Korea, I saw my Chinese TV in my home, and then the Chinese characters, I can barely sometimes understand, even though I don't know how to read. The way reading and writing is completely different, so just understood a little bit. And then after arriving in China, I realized to survive in the country, I mean, many people in outside the world, they're learning language for education or for better life, I don't know. But for me, I learned languages for survive. So that's why maybe I did very my best to learn that than anybody. So arrived in China 2 years, I did my best. And then it helped me actually, because my situation was a little better than other defectors. When defectors cross into China, they don't know where to go. They have no contacts, connections, so they're usually sold as, sex, just that they're sold. So many people had that situation, but I was lucky that I had relatives in China, so I was kept in their home for 2 years. I started from cartoon books, and then, so when I was caught by the Chinese police, it was 3 years later I was caught. And then 2 years later, I was started work in the outside, in the restaurant as a waitress. And then I made a lot of mistakes because the understanding problems. So some customers said, yeah, you are North Korean defector, right? In your generation, who can't understand this word? Something like that. So it was a very freaking moment to me. But after that, 3 years later, when I was caught, I mean, I didn't make the mistake myself. Actually, one of my friends, she was repatriated. I was living in Seonyang at that time. She was repatriated to North Korea because she said when she was sleeping in the middle of the night, the policeman was knocking the door, and then she opened, and then the policeman asked ID cards, and then North Korean defectors usually don't have ID cards, so she was repatriated to North Korea. So it was always, I was worried about my situation, and then one day, it was the only day I was break from the restaurant work, and then they called me that somebody asked my name, so let me come to the restaurant. So I went there, and then I didn't know there was a secret police. They were pretty normal close to me, and then they said, "Are you somebody?" They called me my name. At the time, I used to have a different name, so I said, yes. If I say no, then maybe I can escape the moment. But I never guessed that will be Chinese police, so I said yes. By saying that, I had a very horrible experience. But in the end, I could escape. Yeah. I mean, because of the Chinese language abilities. Because many Chinese, even today, they don't know how to read. So even they tested them, they brought the newspapers to let me read and then writing. And then actually, my writing is pretty good. Even my school, I'm studying in South Korea in university. I'm majoring Chinese, and then my professor told me, actually, you're writing as a native Chinese. So even at that time, I wrote like that because I love to writing, and then that's why the Chinese thought I'm not Chinese. I'm not North Korean defector. That's why they released me.
I think we have time for just one more. I know the gentleman here has been waiting, so we'll take one more, and then we'll transition to our panel.
I'm David DePero from the Cold War Museum. Hearing a lot of connections. Out of my 25 questions I would like to ask you, I'll limit it to art and writing and poetry and film and music, and what role that plays in your life today. Has it been a comfort to you? What have been your influences for writing your book? Are there other books you relied on, other authors that you looked to as models? And especially, thinking of a film, I'm thinking of The Shawshank Redemption, which is a movie about a prison with your story. And certainly art and music play a critical role in that movie for survival.
Well, I don't know what was the movie title.
The Shawshank Redemption.
Oh, I didn't see the movie.
It's a movie about a prison escape.
I only knew Papillon movie. That was a prison. Because I wear my clothes in China, and then people, South Koreans said, you look like a papillon. So I said, what's a papillon? And then they said, see the movie. That's one of the famous movie, the prisoner who was trying to escape.
Steve
Yeah.
McQueen.
But so can you summarize your question to me?
So sort of the art since she's been out of North Korea in South Korea that sort of were there to write your story. Did you sort of see other defectors who had written? Did that inspire you, or while you were in either China or South Korea, what were there artistic things that either brought you comfort or led you to tell your story?
I never thought I'm gonna writing my memoir, but after my TED talk, everything changed. After I never thought that by giving a such short speech can spread all around the world, even from Gaza. People send me the text, your story is so popular here. So wow, it was very impressive at the time. And then later than soon, I got the book contract from the publisher, but I was rejected from the beginning because I was thinking the world only want to hear shocking stories about maybe only prison camp stories or maybe only sex slave stories, but I don't have it, I said. That's why I didn't want to writing. And then actually from Korea's Random House, the boss, he is in meeting, he was persuading to me, your book will be successful. It's a reading market is changing, and then many defector stories are pretty well known. I mean, everybody knows if Googling, but your story is a healing story. So he's persuading me to writing. So I was thinking, yeah. Then from that time, I actually before that, until a long time, I didn't know the meaning of a human rights activist things. But by giving a TED talk, it's all changed me. I mean, it completely changed my direction. My dream was having, businesswoman. I wanted to have trading company between between China and South Korea. But by giving TED talk, it's completely my life changed. So I accepted the publishers have offered, and then I just when I writing, because the reason I started writing because I want to spread this as much as I can by sharing this story. So raising awareness, the most important things. So which I'm asking many people just to even simple things is tweeting, just to share on SNS. So I believe as there's a many not many, but some defectors book already has released, and then also I believe my book will be also bring many attention because my book is not only focused on the famine or the brutality regime. It's focused on as a middle class the daily single life in North Korea. So picturing exactly what's going on in the society. Yes. So my hope is bringing awareness.
Well, I think you have done that today, both in your talk as well as in the book. I know I have many questions, and I'm sure many people in the audience do, but you have some scheduled interviews that we'll escort you to, and then you'll come back, and then we're going to transition to our panel. But please join me in thanking Ms. Lee. It sounded like the sort of the good layout here would be having Kumar start, and then Pam, and then Josh. So Kumar, over to you.
Thank you very much.
It's on.
It's on? Okay. Thanks, Bruce. Amnesty International have documented abuses in North Korea for several years. We were allowed in 70s and early 90s once, that's all. Then we have been prevented from going to that country. So we get information through third source and reliable sources, and we have published reports over the years. And the story just we heard is pretty much following up on what we have heard and documented. The issue in North Korea, from the human rights point of view, is that it's one of the worst countries. It has detained, imprisoned people, tens of thousands, without any charge or trial. As you heard earlier, the family members have been singled out. If someone is wanted or someone have been crossing the line, it is not only the individual that the government goes, it is the whole family. So it's family, it's guilt by association, which is rare. You know, in Indonesia during the 60s, you have seen some similarities, but not to this extent. So we are seeing large number of people who are in prison camps because of not their act, but because whom they have been related to, family members, friends. And in prison, the situation is extremely horrendous. There are hundreds and thousands of prisoners in these camps. They have been forced to work, it's forced labor, for long hours, 10, 12, 14. The food is extremely limited. People have died. Healthcare is extremely limited. So in a nutshell, these prison camps are torture camps where people have been abused and killed. People have died simply because they are connected to someone. Families, you name it, everyone is there. When people try to flee, that topic came up earlier, to China, Chinese government rounds them up and send them back, forcibly returning them. We will address the responsibility of Chinese government in question and answer period. I want to just limit my presentation to what's happening inside. When these people have been returned, the people who have fled, for political reasons as well as for economic reasons, you should understand the food situation is extremely dire. Over 1 million people have died since 1990s, over 1 million. We can also discuss about the food distribution issue later during the question and answer. But when people flee, they have been turned back. And when they return, they face harsh punishments by the North Korean officials. People have been executed, tortured, and imprisoned depending on the variety of offenses they have committed. The other issue is the religious freedom, which all interconnected. Religion is completely banned. No independent religion is allowed. And if any one who have connection to foreign religious activist or anyone, then that is enough to go to prison camps. So religion is completely tied up. Internet, there is it's pretty much a closed country. So there is no information that's flowing in from outside to inside. No internet. They have their own intranet system. The other one is if you are caught listening or reading foreign materials, that's enough to land you in a prison camp. So in a nutshell, it's the life in North Korea is a bubble. People are living in a bubble. Abused for speaking out, punished for becoming religious, or even suspected of being disloyal. And worst of all, if you're related to someone, then you could end up being in these camps. You also want to touch on the other main issue that was mentioned in the Commission of Inquiry, is the distribution of food. There was a famine, as I mentioned earlier. It's partly due to natural disaster, partly due to mismanagement. But when there is a shortage of food, they selectively distributed to those people who are close to them, who are supporters, military and others. That's the first priority. Second priority is to people who are not hostile. Third priority are the people who they suspect to be not loyal or not supporting them. So the third category got affected so badly, that's where the majority of the deaths took place. Even the international assistance were completely barred. Initially they allowed World Food Programme, but then they stopped them from going. And we don't even get the correct information about how many died and what's the nature, because of the limitation of freedom of expression and even information or movement. Including the prison camps, we have to rely partly on satellite. Amnesty International, we have a satellite program through which we were able to identify certain can be corroborated from what we heard from the defectors and refugees who fled to China, and tried to identify these camps and came up with the numbers. Since the situation was so bad, now the situation is at the UN now. There is a commission of inquiry that has been established by the Human Rights Council. They recommended that the situation in North Korea being referred to International Criminal Court or similar international institutions. And they concluded that crimes against humanity have taken place. So that's the situation now. You want me to touch on the recommendations or during the discussion?
Sure.
Number one recommendation which we want, number one is, of course, it's in the UN. So we want the international community, including the US, to not to be wavering in pushing. Rounding up, we know it's difficult because of China and Russian presence there. But US should take the leadership. It's not because North Korea is of different political ideology, in this case communist, but because of the dire human rights situation there. We want US to raise human rights in every interaction they have, and most importantly, not to link human rights with any other initiatives like nuclear discussions or whenever there are some missile tests. That hurts not only human rights, that also hurts the nuclear discussion. I know it's controversial, but the minute you link human rights to some other issues, those governments find it easy to hold those negotiations hostage to human rights. They can release 10 people today and round up 20 tomorrow. So it becomes a kind of a circle. So we urge international community to keep human rights separate from other considerations and focus on the victims and the people of North Korea. And also to China and other countries, mostly China, not to deport any North Koreans who have been fleeing the country because of persecution, maybe for economic reasons as well. But our stand is that all North Koreans, because of the situation inside the country, need protections from the international community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. As Bruce mentioned, I'm in the International Justice Program at Human Rights Watch. I'm based in New York. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the diplomatic traction that we saw last year in New York, which was pretty, it was pretty interesting. It was sparked, as was mentioned, by this Commission of Inquiry report. Now, why was this report significant? Well, as was mentioned, NGOs like Amnesty International, like Human Rights Watch, like NGOs in Seoul in South Korea have long reported on very serious abuses by the North Korean regime. But for the first time, you had a UN body essentially creating a commission to document those abuses, and so it has credibility that no NGO report would have. It has sort of the seal of the international community on it. But it also creates a sense of responsibility for the international community to act. And indeed, that was essentially what the Commission of Inquiry concluded. The situation is so bad, we can no longer turn away. We have a responsibility to help those in North Korea because the government not only will not help those in North Korea, but is in fact responsible for their suffering. So the COI report was very significant, and it prompted a number of actions. You could almost look at it as sort of a domino effect. So the first major impact from the COI report was a resolution in the Human Rights Council. And the resolution in the Human Rights Council, as my colleague just mentioned, had a couple of really key points. The first, it recognized that crimes against humanity were committed pursuant to policies at the highest level of the state. So it really pointed the finger at the government as being responsible for these crimes against humanity, that the government naturally has failed to prosecute them. They have no interest in prosecuting themselves. And then recommended that the UN Security Council consider the Commission of Inquiry report and also consider referral to the International Criminal Court. The recognition of the government's responsibility and the possibility of ICC referral really sparked a strong reaction by the North Korean regime in a way that, a number of diplomats that I spoke with, this was a common theme, the fact that they hadn't seen this kind of activity by North Korea in the last decade. There was more activity in the previous 7 months than there had been in the previous 10 years. And I think it's this idea really of accountability. The North Korean regime thrives, its power structure is based on this idea that it's omnipotent and it's beyond reproach. And all of a sudden you have a UN report that's been accepted by a number of countries saying, actually, you could be held responsible. These are crimes against humanity, and you could be held responsible for these actions, I think was deeply insulting. And really challenged the power structure of the regime. So it really sparked a very strong reaction. And I would say that it was a diplomatic offensive. It started off as a diplomatic offensive. It started as a charm offensive that I think devolved into something that was just offensive. It started in Geneva. You saw for the first time, the North Korean regime really trying to approach states, trying to show that it was willing to consider certain human rights recommendations that had been made in the years prior, willing to consider them. There's a process called the Universal Periodic Review process. Every state is subject to it. And basically, all states around the world make certain recommendations to a particular country to improve their human rights record. For the first time, the DPRK accepted 113 out of 268 recommendations that were made. And then, moving over to New York, in the lead up to the General Assembly, you had suddenly the North Korean diplomatic mission was hosting a press conference, and they wanted to issue their own human rights report, where, by the way, they mentioned the fact that Amnesty International had been allowed in the country in the 90s. But they had their own press conference to publicize their own report. Then they tried to put forward their own resolution to essentially pat themselves on the back for their human rights record. And that was meant to preempt efforts towards a strong resolution within the UN General Assembly. So every year, the UN General Assembly has a resolution on North Korea, essentially condemning in very strong terms the abuses that are committed there. And the strategy for the last couple of years has essentially been to ignore it. If you ignore it, you don't really draw a lot of attention to it, and in a way, it's a way of immunizing yourself from pressure. But this year was different, of course, because of the Commission of Inquiry report, because of the resolution that had preceded it in the Human Rights Council. Suddenly you had, in the General Assembly, so that's 193 states, considering language that mirrored the HRC resolution. So essentially the fact that crimes against humanity were committed at the highest levels of the state and that there was a possibility of the International Criminal Court intervening should the Security Council take up the matter. Well, to preempt that, as I said, they put forward their own resolution, and then they actually started to engage in New York. And it was these two paragraphs, the fact that there were crimes against humanity, the state was responsible, and that ICC referral was on the table, deeply offensive. They were willing to, they'd pressed the drafters of the resolution to essentially cut those paragraphs of the resolution in exchange for letting the special rapporteur. So essentially, this is a person nominated by the international community that's essentially tasked with covering the human rights situation in North Korea. He's never been allowed access into the country. And suddenly, they were willing to consider providing him access if we could just get rid of this pesky accountability problem. Well, unsurprisingly, after I think a lot of terse discussions, that concession wasn't made, thankfully. And the resolution in the General Assembly came to a vote, and 111 states voted yes, which is a pretty strong resolution considering the resolution included reference to the International Criminal Court. Why is that significant? Well, it was significant because, on the one hand, you could say it's just a piece of paper. It doesn't have any binding power. But from our perspective, this was a very significant piece of paper because you had 111 states saying they were deeply concerned about North Korea, and the Security Council better consider doing something about it. And it was essentially, from the perspective of NGOs and other friendly states on the Security Council, we used that as leverage within the council to push for what's called a procedural vote in the Security Council. And a procedural vote is significant because it can't be vetoed. So although China did not like it, they could not veto it because 10 states on the council deemed it a priority. So in essence, what we were left with at the end of last year was a big victory in the General Assembly, initially 111 votes, which later turned into 116 votes in favor of the resolution, and formal discussion of the situation in North Korea on the Security Council's agenda, something that, quite frankly, as someone who, I work at Human Rights Watch, we are thinking about impossible things all the time. It didn't seem possible even 6 months prior. So there was significant progress made in a very short period of time. And as I said, a key element of that progress, and I think, as I said before, which was a key sticking point, was this idea of accountability and the possibility of referral to the International Criminal Court. So what do we do with this now? It's a formal agenda item on the Security Council, but of course the Security Council membership changes every year. And I can tell you that based on my knowledge of how the Security Council works with its current membership, it's not as friendly as the previous membership to discussion on North Korea human rights. So I think the challenge is really to push the Security Council to continue to engage. And that's something, we have some friendly states, I think, including the US, thankfully, some friendly states on the council that are willing to take some risks and push those states that perhaps are on the fence to embrace this approach and keep it on the international agenda. A couple of other important elements. The UN resolutions created what's known as a field structure in Seoul. So essentially, it's an office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights that is tasked with continuing the work of the Commission of Inquiry. So it will continue to gather information from defectors, from others, to maintain to continue the dialogue on North Korea human rights. I think a critical part of the work that it has to do is to really document the power structure of the regime. This is something that was touched upon in the Commission of Inquiry report, but not in as much detail as it could have been. And that's really, I think, a key to accountability. It's not just the Kim dynasty that's implicated. It's a number of other officials. And I think really sharpening up that message that you too could be held to account for the horrible abuses that you're complicit in perpetuating can increase pressure on the regime. And one thing that I have learned as well in the course of doing this accountability work, I often get this question, well, what's the point? China's never going to let this happen. To which I would say, you never can say never. I mean, I think that, what we heard earlier was that the relationship between North Korea and China is volatile. And it may not be in China's interest to consider referral to the International Criminal Court now, but who's to say how that calculation could change in the years to come? So it's the responsibility, I think, of civil society and states who want to address the human rights situation in North Korea. It's the responsibility to keep the idea of accountability alive so it isn't swept under the rug should there be reform of the regime or change in leadership or collapse. To make sure that victims' voices are heard and that those who committed crimes against them are brought to account. And I also think it's important not just for China, but also actually for South Korea, to understand that transitional justice is critical for victims, both those who are living in South Korea, but also, again, in the event of reform or collapse, whatever shall happen in the future, there's a whole constituency of people who deserve justice, and it should be a priority for them as well. So thank you very much.
Great, thanks very much, Pam. Josh?
Thank you. So if my remarks here today have a single theme, that theme is probably follow the money. And I would begin first by saying if you were to drag an honorarium from about DuPont Circle down to Foggy Bottom, you would easily assemble 100 North Korea experts who could tell you exactly what we should not do about North Korea. But we are in a moment of policy paralysis where it seems that very little has happened policy-wise since President Bush tried to make the deal with North Korea in 2007, unless you count the Leap Day Agreement of 2012. And privately, a lot of people will admit this. So speaking only in my capacity as a private citizen with a blog, what do I think that we should do about all of this? If you'll humor me, I would offer some very specific suggestions. And really all of it comes down to we need to shift the balance of power inside North Korea itself. It's time for us to think more aggressively about it. So among these 100 experts that we have assembled in our imagination, most of them would say that they still hope for a deal, like one of the agreed frameworks. Probably the less ambitious ones would say maybe we should try again for a freeze or a Leap Day deal. Most of them would privately admit that that's almost completely impossible now, that North Korea isn't interested in any deal, that they're getting where they want to go anyway. And so then what is left? The administration says it's trying to pressure North Korea with sanctions. But if you read and follow the sanctions very carefully, you'll see that this really isn't the case. The North Korean regime sustains itself by earning money in a number of ways, legitimate and illegitimate, by commingling that money and essentially doing what's called money laundering and returning it to deposits primarily in Europe and China. Most of that money is denominated in dollars, according to the UN panel of experts that monitors the Sixth Security Council sanctions resolutions, and thereby it passes right under the nose of our Treasury Department through the U.S. financial system, where, with the exception of 71 blocked North Korean entities, those transactions don't even require a license, unlike the case of Iran or Syria, or until recently Cuba or Burma. What strong sanctions look like is a comprehensive requirement for, at the very least, a license by the Treasury Department to transact with that government. Unlike Iran and Burma, North Korea, which counterfeits our currency, is not a primary money laundering concern. Unlike Belarus and Zimbabwe, and the president and all of the top leaders of both of those governments are personally sanctioned and listed as specially designated nationals for subverting the democratic process. None of the top officials of North Korea are designated. Kim Jong-un is not designated. None of his top people, the members of the National Defense Committee, any of the people who are in charge now. They're not designated. There are hundreds of Iranian entities, hundreds of Cuban entities that are designated. And of course, we know from the Iran experience that sanctions and diplomacy are not the antithesis of each other, that sanctions give diplomats leverage to negotiate. And finally, a point that is important to me personally, which is that North Korea is not listed as a state sponsor of terrorism. Now, we all heard in very moving terms Hyeon-soo speaking about the fear that she feels living in Seoul. I'm almost glad that she isn't here to hear what I'm going to elaborate on for you, which is the fact that the North Koreans, in fact, attempted to assassinate an activist named Park Sang-hak. He was convicted for this in South Korean court. The North Koreans kidnapped and murdered a U.S. resident named Kim Dong-sik. The U.S. District Court and the Court of Appeals for the D.C. Circuit have both held that North Korea was responsible for this and that it was an act of terrorism. North Korea attempted on several occasions to assassinate the senior Hwang Jang-yap, the highest level defector from North Korea. There have been numerous other attempts at assassination, including the killing of a man named Patrick Kim in China. And yet our State Department reports that North Korea is not known to have sponsored an act of terrorism since 1987. Despite all of this, despite 3 known weapons shipments to Hezbollah, and in spite of the fact that North Korea drove a major feature film out of theaters all across America with terrorist threats to attack theaters, I would argue the most devastating attack on free expression here in our own country in U.S. history. In spite of this, where is the accountability? Where is the evidence that the Obama administration is willing to hold North Korea responsible for crimes like this? Where is the evidence that they are standing with brave women like Hyeon-soo who could have been anything had she been fortunate enough to be born anywhere else, a woman of such intelligence and dignity? Imagine the potential that is lost as 23 million North Koreans grow up in a system that is stunted, that represses them so. Congress, by the way, is not waiting, and it has expressed its frustration with the administration's inaction in both houses of Congress, I'm happy to say, by introducing a bipartisan bill called the North Korea Sanctions Enforcement Act. It builds on the approach that was extremely effective when it was tried in 2005, which is cutting off North Korea's access to the international financial system, that attaches firm conditions to the lifting of the sanctions so that we don't repeat the mistakes that President Bush made in 2007. But sanctions by themselves are not a strategy to transform North Korea into a different kind of a place. And that, of course, is the ultimate goal. Sanctions are certainly one important component of that. But our objective is to shift the balance of power inside North Korea itself by constraining the finances of the regime, while at the same time doing more to engage the people and to put information and, yes, money in their hands. So how do we go about doing it? The barriers are obvious, and they are technological. In the United States and Japan, we have the 2 foremost leaders in technological information in the world, and 2 nations that have a great interest in achieving change in North Korea. Find a way to break the information blockade in North Korea, not only between North Korea and other nations, but between North Koreans and other North Koreans. And the possibilities become endless. You could build an electronic banking system that would not only encourage and incentivize people to grow food in private plots called sotoji farms, but you would be able to set up humanitarian NGOs to distribute food to the hungry, and to the people who are written off by the North Korean government as expendable, people like Hyeon-soo. You would be able to organize virtual family reunions. And what more credible attack could there be on the credibility of the regime's claims than to hear from your own relatives in South Korea how well they are doing. You could establish virtual churches and virtual labor unions. You could establish guerrilla journalism all across North Korea, not only to tell us the truth about what's happening inside the North, but also to help North Koreans themselves share in what is being experienced in different cities and different provinces. I would argue that today, many North Koreans know more about conditions in Seoul than they do about conditions in the next province. And if North Koreans are ever going to gain the power to challenge the state, they must be able to organize with each other. So this is really where our engagement priority must be, not with engaging with the regime, and I would challenge anyone, and you will have a chance to ask questions, to explain one example of how engaging the North Korean regime has achieved significant and lasting change in the North Korean system. The North Koreans are very good at manipulating us, but the people who have the greatest interest in achieving change are the people like Hyeon-soo Lee who are still inside North Korea. Those are the people that we must reach. Now, I know that my youthful appearance will make this difficult to believe, but I am in fact a child of the 80s. And when I was growing up in the 1980s, the whole world united in moral outrage against South Africa and against the apartheid system that ruled that country. Where is the outrage against North Korea today? I think some of it begins here, but there is much more that must happen for it to equal the same level. I was fortunate enough to live in South Africa starting just 2 or 3 months after Nelson Mandela was freed from Robben Island. I saw apartheid repealed, and I saw among the very people who voted themselves out of oligarchy that sanctions and isolation and the condemnation of the world changed the way they felt about the system and convinced them to abandon it. If the regime is isolated, but the people are empowered with money and information, corruption will take its toll, the balance of power will begin to shift. The objective, in a very clear phrase, is that when the government orders the soldiers to crack down, the time will come when they will refuse. They will fear accountability. They will fear a reaction from their own population. They will fear prosecution. They will fear the loss of foreign investment. They will fear the loss of their own livelihoods and their own futures. That's the situation that we must seek to bring about, and I hope that we will all give a very careful thought to bringing about a world in which perhaps not Hyeon-soo Lee's family, but maybe their children will know a better time. Thank you.
Great, thanks. I want to ask one question before I turn it over to the audience, and I think this is for Pam. My understanding is right now, so that North Korean human rights is a formal agenda item for the NSC, and it's sort of sitting there until someone pushes it. And I've heard sort of two theories. One is maybe sort of the kick in the door theory of forcing a vote. And since we know China is very resistant, it would be having a private conversation with Beijing saying, look, we're going to make you either vote yes or formally veto it. It's no more hiding in the shadows, no more deferring to you because we fear that you might veto it. On this issue, you're either with the devil or with the angels. There's no halfway measures, unlike nuclear issues where you can make arguments about compromises. The other theory is don't force a vote unless you can be assured of the result, because I believe it's once this is brought forward, if it's shot down, then that is it. It's a one-time shot. So don't force a vote unless you're guaranteed of the result you want. Leave it as a Damocles sword over the head of North Korea, over the head of China. So one, is that correct? And is which school of thought or another one would you come down in?
I mean, that's right. I mean, essentially, the procedural vote last year was significant because it put the human rights situation, well, really the situation on the Korean Peninsula as a formal agenda item on the Council's agenda. But it is still vulnerable to another procedural vote. I mean, if China thinks that last year we had 10 states, 10 out of 15, you need a 2/3 majority, which is 9 states, but really you need 10 to be assured of the result, because states can always waffle. Those numbers are hard to replicate, to be honest, with the current, the way the council is formed now. That's not to say that it's impossible. And I would suggest, rather than, investing energy to try to get China to accept the vote, rather it's better to invest energy in persuading those states that are perhaps on the fence, like Nigeria that abstained, or Chad that abstained, although they did vote yes in the General Assembly, and they're leaving the council. States are a little bit more willing to take risks when the consequences are minimized, of course. So I would really target those states that are leaving the council. Jordan voted yes the last time. I think reinforcing Jordan, can't hurt. It can only help. Malaysia, they have close ties with North Korea. It may be that the best you can hope for is that they would abstain, but I think it's worth the diplomatic effort that you referenced, again, rather than investing it and pushing it towards China, rather to invest it with respect to these other states.
Okay, great, thanks. All right, when you ask a question, if it's directed specifically at any of the panelists or several, if you could identify that, otherwise serve it up and we'll figure out which panelists should address it. So I open the floor. Susan. Oh, we have a. Shout it out? You can, or we have a microphone coming, so. Oh. Can you shout?
I have a two-part question, and it has to do with the United States, so probably to Josh. One is, where does the North Korean Sanctions Act stand, not just in the House, but on the Senate side, where I'm not even aware that it's been formally introduced? And secondly, in January, the President issued an executive order that came out of the Sony incident, and under that executive order, he has the power to impose sanctions, not just on companies, but on individuals. And I know that at least 10 or a dozen or so individual names have been submitted whose information has also been submitted and accepted by Interpol, so that they have some data background on that. And I wonder where these stand, and will any of these efforts actually
I'm very glad you asked, because you allow me to cover 2 points that I ran through in the interest of time. First is the North Korea Sanctions Enforcement Act in the House is H.R. 757. It's been marked up before the committee, and at some point it's going to go to the full House floor. We're very early in this Congress, and although I suspect that Iran will preoccupy the Congress for some time, it'll make it to the floor at some point in the near future. As far as the Senate, Senators Menendez and Graham introduced S 1747, a Senate companion to the North Korea Sanctions Enforcement Act last Friday, as a matter of fact. And so while there are some differences between that and the House version, and I've looked at it in some detail, it's a good bill. It's bipartisan. It's a good starting point for a discussion. Who knows what it's going to look like when it comes out of the conference committee, but I think this, as an opening bid, suggests that the two houses will be able to come to some kind of a good convergence. I would also suggest that the person that we haven't yet heard from is Senator Corker, so that would be another place I would continue to watch closely. Now, you asked about Executive Order 13687. That's the order that President Obama signed on January 2nd. If you look at it, it's sweeping and broad. It really allows the government to designate any North Korean entity whose assets pass through the financial system. And if you first look at it, it almost looks like all of North Korea is completely cut out of the system. But if you read the language carefully with your lawyer's green eye shade, you realize that there has to be a designation by the State Department and the Treasury Department that the person is in fact an official of the government of North Korea. So it's been 6, 7 months now since January. I'm not good with math. That's why I went to law school. But we still have not concluded that Kim Jong-un is an official of the government of North Korea. I had a Jewish uncle, Uncle Irving, who used to say, is the Pope Catholic? In order to sort of illustrate a point. Is Kim Jong-un an official of the government of North Korea? I would think so. But what we have done instead is we have designated a total of 13 persons. Now, in the context of sanctions law, person means a natural person, an entity. It can mean anything. So of these 13 persons, 3 are entities like, I want to say, one is the Reconnaissance General Bureau, and they're North Korean government agencies at about the mid-level that were already designated years before. So what's the point of this? I don't understand, I confess. Maybe someone can give me the answer to that question. And then there were 10 low-level arms dealers who were designated. I guarantee you that by mid-February, the replacements arrived in Moscow and Windhoek and all of the other places. So that's playing whack-a-mole, and that's a loser's game, because North Korea, as any of the UN panel of expert reports will tell you, is very good at aliases and shell companies and front companies. You have to move as quickly and aggressively against them as you do against Iran. You have to make it a priority.
Okay. Another, oh, sir.
But okay, here it is. What is the appetite? We had somebody come into the Cold War Museum who was a West German citizen, and she said, 25 years after the Berlin Wall fell, West Germans still have like a line item on their annual taxes that goes directly to essentially East German direct aid. And there are people living in East Germany who still basically live the old communist lifestyle of sitting on their butts and waiting for a check from the government. I think there are some good lessons to learn from, let's say, German reunification and the Arab Spring as to the kinds of dislocation and what's the appetite for unification in South Korea. Does South Korea see unification the same way West Germany saw unification, both the positives and the negatives? I'm trying to ask briefer questions. I didn't succeed this time either, sorry.
Well, I'll take a crack. On unification, we've seen a lot of talk from the current South Korean administration, the Park Geun-hye administration. When she first started talking about it a year and a half ago, several of us Americans were in Seoul, and we were meeting with senior officials, and sort of a common question was like, all right, this is right after Chung Song-tek's execution. If not only the president, but the head of the National Intelligence Service is talking about unification, does that mean you guys have information behind the scenes about instability, and that's why you're talking about it? It turned out that it was a bit more of, well, my president's talking about it, I work for the president, therefore I'm talking about it. Since then, it's as if South Korea is sort of reading its own press, and now you get a lot of unification seminars, and we're happy to go and talk. But for the Americans, we're like, just because you're talking about it a lot doesn't mean it's any more likely or any closer to happening. But there seems to be that growing push. But when you look at the polls, there's sort of a striation by generation. The older generation, those who remember Korea before it was divided, who remember the help that the U.S. provided not only to, in defeating the invasion but also rebuilding South Korea, are really the most supportive of unification. They may have come from Northern Korea. They want to reunify. They see North Korea as the northern half of their nation. The other extreme is the young generation. They see North Korea as a separate nation. They see it as dangerous. It has nothing really in common with South Korea. They don't see that, that it is part of their country. And they are much more entrepreneurial. And they see absorption of North Korea, which is what unification should be. There's nothing in the North to save except the people. They see it as a huge impact on the South Korean national economy and on their personal economy. So they are the least supportive of unification. And the other generations are somewhere in the middle. With President Park talking so much about a unification, there has been sort of an uptick in support, but really it's still below 50%. So there's not a great push for unification. But I think one of the things that came out in Hyeon-seo's book was the difficulties that she and her brother and her mother had in assimilating into South Korea, to even really, being accepted. And if you extrapolate that to 23 million people, a very large baby being left on your doorstep one day, I don't know if South Korea can really handle that. I mean, not only economically, but just how do you assimilate that many people who are really from another planet? They have no sense of how to respond to freedom. And as she described in her book, the difficulties in making choices. And so I think unification is going to be very difficult for any number of reasons. Not only what do you do with nuclear weapons, what do you do with the North Korean officials, do you give them amnesty or not, but also how do you absorb 23 million people who have no concept of even the most basic precepts of South Korean society of freedom and democracy?
Does that leave just China?
China
a province of China?
Well, there's questions as to what would China do in a collapse scenario, and they're very reluctant to discuss that, not only at an official level, but even academics. And part of it is that they don't want to talk about it even privately because they feel the New York government leaks like a sieve, which it does, and that if we talk about what would each country do in a collapse scenario, it's going to become public, and then North Korea is going to hear about it, and therefore China loses some access. It's sort of like, the relatives of a grandmother, talking about who gets grandma's silverware while she's still alive. They don't want to do it because grandma might find out. But we do need to do some preparations ahead of time, and if not with China, at least certainly with South Korea and the United States. We have another question? Right in the back. Oh, okay, and then we have another.
Mr. Kumar, you talked about the United States needed to take a lead, but in this, and how do you envision the United States being actually helpful? I mean, what can we do that's actually helpful? Because, in terms of engaging the North Koreans on human rights, we're the last people they want to talk to on that subject. And we've got 25,000 troops on the other side of the DMZ. We're in a situation of armistice. We're not the best advocate in terms of the North Koreans being open to us. It is my view. But it does seem to me that there's a lot of things that other nations can do, and they're much more credible. The Canadians, the Swedes, the Germans, the European countries, and other Asian countries. So when you say take the lead, that we have to take the lead, how can we be positive and be supportive, and how does that work for you?
Yeah, the simple reason why U.S. should take the lead is because U.S. is the only superpower. They have the enormous resources and contacts. You can't expect North Korea to take Canadian proposal seriously. So definitely, U.S. should coordinate these activities and bring action in the international level. Most importantly, what I said was, North Koreans should believe sincerely that U.S. is not mixing human rights with other issues, other contentious issues like nuclear issues or any other issues. Then they can go, when you have these, like the Security Council issues, if they can take firm stand with other countries, that's the only way we can do. China, for example, pure human rights, you can ask about the deportation of these refugees who are fleeing, which enormous pressure has been given, but still China is reluctant and still deporting people. That can be a start. But how to change internally is the Commission of Inquiry is the best method, and that's what U.S. should play a meaningful role.
Can I just add to that? I mean, some practical ideas. I mean, along the lines of what Bruce and I just discussed a couple of minutes ago. You know, heads of state come to New York for the General Assembly in September. The U.S. obviously has a direct line to a number of heads of state, including those states that are on the Security Council. So raising it at that level to say, look, a discussion in the Security Council is a priority for the U.S. before the end of the year. We really want your state to support it. I think another example could be, you know, putting pressure on the South Korean government, frankly, to share confidential information with a field-based structure in Seoul. Because I think, you know, what I think Josh had alluded to was this idea that we need to have more information about people who are responsible for crimes. We need a map of the leadership. And yes, it changes, but at the same time, if you can have a clear idea of how the power structure works, it brings us closer to accountability and to really destabilizing those who are perhaps committing abuses within the regime, to maybe get them to think twice. You know, there's a whole category of defectors, insiders, who don't go through the regular process through Hanwon in South Korea. They're separate. They're kept separate. In essence, they're in a sort of a form of witness protection. You know, to put pressure on the Korean government to share some of that information that's not too sensitive with the field-based office to really start doing that mapping and bring us closer to accountability to, over the longer term, put pressure on North Korea.
I think we have time for one more. There's a woman in the back, last row.
Would you say that it's a personal dictatorship or a dictatorship controlled by the military in North Korea?
I'll take a crack. There's been a lot of debate, actually, over the decades as to the nature of the regime. During the Kim Jong-il era, a lot of times some would argue about factionalism, usually sort of softliners and hardliners. And it was usually depicted as sort of, you know, Kim Jong-il with the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other, and it was the softliners and the hardliners. And so that, you know, it was interpreted that if there was a tough or a hardline statement coming out of North Korea, this meant that the military, the security services had influence or control over Kim Jong-il, and therefore, if the U.S. only offered concessions, that this would strengthen the softliners, that this would show Kim Jong-il that there were benefits to engaging with the U.S. And conversely, if there was a sort of a softer statement from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, then this showed that the softliners had influence, and therefore the U.S. should offer concessions in order to strengthen the softliners. Well, we knew in government that Kim Jong-il was in charge. He controlled the military. The military did not control him. He had 5 security services watching the citizens and watching each other and watching senior members of government. And that it was, if he decided he wanted to send a strong message, he sent it through the Ministry of Defense. If he wanted to send a soft message, he sent it through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. But on the outside, it was interpreted as warring factions. And so similarly with Kim Jong-un, there's a lot of debate continued about, you know, is he running the show? Is he a puppet of others? But if you look at it, even right from when his father died, he was not only announced as the single leader, there was no revolutionary council, there was no triumvirate, but he, within 6 months, got 6 important titles, which gave him absolute control of the military, the party, and the state, the government. And you know, when we see purges, some would argue that this is a weak, embattled Kim who's desperately trying to fight off challengers. I believe it's the opposite, that he's firmly in charge. He's confident enough to take out even the second most powerful man in North Korea. He's changed the chief of the general staff in the Ministry of Defense, Minister of Defense 5 or 6 times. The minions have not risen up. So I think he is in charge. So I think it is, you know, a one-person dictatorship. Obviously, he's reliant on the system and the entities and the ministries and the military. But he's playing one off against the other, and you know, we haven't seen, no one can identify a Nelson Mandela, Aung San Suu Kyi. No one can identify an opposition party, an opposition leader that some might rally around. And people have been executed simply for mentioning the word reform in Kim Jong-il's presence. So Kim Jong-un has shown himself to be just as resistant to reform. So I think with that, we are out of time. So please join me in thanking our panelists.